It's finally time, ladies and gentlemen, to see why these German tier 9 medium tanks are the best in World of Tanks. And so we're going to kick it off with, of course, the best tier 9 German medium tank, at least in my opinion, which is the Leopard PTA. And the Leopard PTA is, of course, the tech tree version. You can pick this one up for completely free as long as you've got the time and the facilities to earn enough silver to buy this thing in the game. And we're going to see how our player here is going to be able to actually dominate in the Leopard PTA and come away with the win, and why you guys should definitely not sleep on these things when you see them in the game. And of course, I'll be interested to see your thoughts in the comment section down below. But of course, straight off the bat, he's coming to the typical medium position where you get quite a few different shots within the game. You've got a lot of opportunity to deal a lot of damage from a location like this, but you also have to pay very close attention to what's happening in your games. And that is exactly why I wanted to show this replay, because other than the fact that this is one of the highest damage games that a Leopard PTA has been able to have, it's also a really good one because it's not your typical kind of just point and shoot style gameplay where a player kind of gets that amazing matchup. A player is also good enough to be able to deal the damage, but it's a big combination of all things that the player is going to have to do. So that's why I wanted to show this one as the Leopard PTA, because it's a good example. But the key thing about the Leopard PTA is that it is a medium tank that has the possibility of having way higher alpha damage than a lot of other medium tanks at tier 9, and that's because it has 420 alpha damage. It also gets these amazing APCR rounds as standard with 278 pen, and then when you've got the premium rounds you have 323, which means when you're coming up against tier 9s and tier 10s, you're quite easily able to deal with a lot of them because you're not limited by penetration, and more so about the game actually having the RNG and making sure that when you're playing in your tanks like this that you can get into the right sort of positions. And a place like this is very good. You can get like lots of shots. You're seeing here the Emil one on the enemy team, obviously underestimating how much of the side of his turret that he's actually giving to the opposite team. But the great thing is that although you're seeing a lot of the teammates up in the northeastern corner of the map, there's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to in this game, because as the teams start to fail their way, as I'm sure you're very well aware that teams are not particularly the most helpful in World of Tanks, and you have to pay very close attention if you want to be able to consistently carry in your games. Now, in coming to this position, the one thing that you have to stay very aware of is that the enemy team can be in these bushes. Now, we saw that there was a Waffle Panzer 4 earlier who was up here. You also saw that there's been quite a few tanks on the enemy team spotted in the location opposite, and this is very traditional of playing Malinovka in general. And you're also seeing that some of the enemy team have started making their way into the field, so when he crests up here, he has to be very sure that he is not spotted. And how you actually do that? Well, for all intents and purposes, what you need to do is when you pull up here, you'll most likely get spotted when you fire, and that's because someone's going to be in this bush or potentially over here as well, or if there's light tanks on the enemy team, they can be over there as well. So when you know that there is at least some people over here, what you have to do is as soon as you fire, you pull back down the ridge. This is basically commonplace in World of Tanks, and most people don't do it and end up taking a few hits, and me myself included. Sometimes you push the limits of where you think you're going to be able to get shots without getting hit, and of course when you do fire, you should be pulling back behind the ridge line. But given that the friendly team up in the north are starting to get pumped, he really needs to start outputting some damage, and although he's done 3.4 thousand damage, which equates to about 8 shots worth of damage in this thing, which is kind of crazy in itself, he's really seeing that the friendly team are starting to fail. And this is when they have completely failed. There are, what, 5-6 vehicles up on the top of the hill, and considering now that he is the furthest forward on the team, you don't stay in the same spot hoping that it's going to deal the same results, because now you have no teammates to trade and you've got to do something differently. And that's exactly what this leopard player does. He understands that, yep, being the furthest forward might get you a bit of spotting damage, but as soon as you get spotted, it's all over. So rather than kind of sitting around, he decides to pull back to this position. This is the common delayed retreat. As you kind of play World of Tanks, you'll start to learn the different spots at which you can kind of pull back over a period of the game going. And on Malinovka, this is almost a crucial thing. It's more important on the other side actually, because you genuinely can't get spotted basically when you pull back on the other side, which is one of the most balanced things about Malinovka. Probably shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it is. Now, what you're seeing here is great use of being able to stay outside of the view range of all of the enemy tanks. And what does that do? Well, it allows you to get free shots into them before they're ever going to be able to spot you, because they're simply not within your view range and the maximum view range in the game. And of course that's denoted by the big circle. I'm sure you guys know this at this point of playing World of Tanks, but you know, what you can do is make sure that you're constantly outside of that and allow your teammates to actually spot for you. And luckily there's a competent player in the Shah Future 4 in this game who's platooned up with our player here in the PTA. Now obviously STA2 is poking the ridge. Now if we look in third person, you can actually see it's the common ridge where people will poke. This is where he was, and often a lot of the enemy team will push down off of their ridge and come up into this location and then end up spotting all of the people who might have been here, or things like the Shah or anyone that's kind of camping down in this area here. And as soon as that happens, everyone from the hill is going to be able to pump you and you're going to lose a ton of your hit points, which is why coming back to here is one of the best things that you can do. Now this game has been pretty slow at this point in the game, and having done 5,000 damage, you would probably be thinking there's only a couple thousand more damage potentially within this game, and you'd be completely wrong. This is a German tier 9 medium tank. This isn't any old medium tank, this is a German one, and so it's going to be a crazy result. And what we see is, of course, as the game goes on and some of the enemy tanks start to dwindle in their kind of group mentality of having like 5 or 6 tanks all in one place, you can start picking them off individually as they start making misplays. And the German tanks are just very good at being able to do that. And you can see here the Lerva YOLOing through the field. It isn't a good play by the Lerva, and so you might as well capitalise on it, and that's exactly what happens, picking up another 1,000 damage roughly between the couple of shots he's last fired. And now it looks like there's about 3 or 4 tanks on each side, and so there's directly to the north, and you're seeing them kind of pushing down the hill, and you've also got a lot of the opponents starting to push in from the side. Now what's great about the German tanks in general is that not only do they get really good kind of standard penetration, premium penetration, but you also get crazy amounts of penetration on your HE rounds, because they follow in the same footsteps as a lot of the German tanks. It has HEP rounds, and HEP rounds are just basically overpowered HE rounds in the game, where you just have more penetration and the same amount of alpha damage as all of the other tanks in the game basically, and their HE rounds. So when you do start loading HE in the Leopard, you do have 510 damage per shell, and of course it costs you nothing but your reload, of course being the same as you would load a standard round. So when you are using the German medium tanks, you just need to be aware of the ammo types that you have available to you to maximize how much damage you can deal. And there's a Shah Future 4 who's decided that he is going to try and dig out this Leopard PTA, and you can see he is looking like he may even spot the Leopard, and he is almost certainly spotted at this point. You saw that there was some breaks in the bush right there and there, and as soon as that happens, this is usually where it all goes pear-shaped. But luckily he kind of full well knows that when he's spotted he needs to move, and that's exactly what he does. But in this matchup you're probably thinking, oh gosh, this is not good. There are so many tanks from all directions that as soon as you get spotted again, you're gonna get pumped. But in coming here, the only tanks that can really hit you are the Waffle and of course the M5Y or the M6Y. And essentially when you come here, it's a nice little position because what you can do is use this ridge over here to avoid any shots from the field. And so you're limiting down how many different angles that you can get hit from, which is one of the best things in the game. And when you've got all the little campers who love just sitting around till the end of the game on their full health, yeah, it doesn't end up too well. And you can see here, it isn't ending up too well. You're not usually expecting to at least survive this long when you've kind of been sat around. And so having done 8.6k damage, you'd be very happy with how it's going. But he really does need to start finishing off some of these angles so he can open up the play again, because this happens in World of Tanks a lot, where you feel like you've had a decent game but then you get cornered into one niche little spot and you can't do anything from there. And that is usually where a lot of the good games could have turned into amazing games, provided that they hadn't made some tiny misplays or ended up in a spot like this. And of course when you end up in spots like this, you end up on 36 health like you're seeing here, and obviously no one wants that, but it does occasionally happen. And there you go, one shell into the CC, of course low rolling, just enough to leave the CC left alive. It is always the play on World of Tanks, and it's one of the most triggering things is when you could have finished a tank that's really annoying and in an annoying spot, and then it low rolls for a 20 damage or 30 damage as that one did. So yeah, a pain in the backside, and that leaves, yeah, not the best situation right now. But rather than kind of staying there and hoping that the enemy team are just completely bot-like, he uses the fact that he's probably no longer spotted to get back into his location at the back. And this is a very, very powerful position, and it's something people just don't usually use. And a lot of people get very scared about how it's going to end up. And luckily, because there's a good combination between the Shah and the Leopard PTA in this game, he's going to be able to really deal with a lot of these vehicles, because the Shah's spotting and the PTA's dealing the damage from the back. Because at the end of the day, if it was the other way around, at this sort of late stage of the game, you don't have the output of damage that you need to constantly deal with the low health vehicles when you're playing in the Shah. Now that's because the Shah has an autoloader, but as soon as the autoloader is out of rounds, you can't do anything. So what do you do from that point? What do you actually do to be able to get more damage? And potentially that's where the Leopard PTA has the advantage, and why single shotguns have advantages over having a autoloading vehicle. It's basically the constant output of damage, whereas, you know, that can stop you from being taken out a lot of the time, and it stops people from YOLOing you as much as soon as they know that you're reloading, because you reload in about 9 or 8 seconds, something like that, compared to the Shah, which reloads in about 20. So yeah, it's one of those things where you have to take it with a pinch of salt when you're using an autoloader, that you have to finish off everyone, but you also can't just assume that people aren't going to go for you, and you have to play very, very thoughtful as to where you can relocate when you need to. Now, the Leopard, if he wants to win this game, he's going to have to use the bush mechanics. That's exactly what he does here. Maybe just enough to be able to finish this guy off. If he can finish him off without getting spotted, he's going to be able to win. But unfortunately, by the looks of it, the Pantera comes through, and you would expect that he got spotted there through the tiny minuscule crack right there that you can see in the game. But luckily he doesn't. There's actually a tiny little bush in between the Pantera and of course where he was at, allowing him to finish him off. And considering that the view range of this vehicle is actually better than the enemy MK, then he is going to be able to outspot this guy for the most part every single time, and they're both on a one-shot. Now both vehicles have no armor, but luckily this tier 9 medium is just a dominant force, and so hopefully, fingers crossed, he'll be able to secure one more damaging hit, and oh my word, he manages to finish that guy straight off and wins the game for 10,846 damage done within this game, which is why the Leopard PTA is genuinely one of the best tier 9 medium tanks, and in fact probably better tier for tier than the Leopard 1. And yeah, with 10 kills in this game, picking up a Pools medal, showcasing really why this tank is amazing. And if you thought that Germany would only have one amazing tier 9 medium, well, no, they literally have 3. And of course, now we're looking at the E50, and this is the kind of premium spamming kind of E50M at tier 9. And this one is more relying on its armor model. It has the typical side scraping mentality when it comes to playing a little bit more aggressively and trying to use armor whilst also having pretty decent damage output, and of course all of the benefits of having view range and stuff like that medium tanks will actually provide you, and better camo, etc. And of course the E50 is less of a traditional medium tank when it comes to playing as a medium, and it's definitely one of the easier vehicles to play when you're thinking of getting into playing mediums as like a first resort. It's actually one of the first medium tanks that I would ever recommend for people to play, because it mixes both the playstyle of having a little bit of forgiveness for, you know, if you make a bad play, sometimes you can bounce, most of the time you won't, but you can, and it's a little bit less kind of daunting when you first start playing and you realize everyone is just penning me every single time, and it gets super frustrating. And that's kind of what you want when you do play your tanks. And ultimately, it's one of the biggest reasons why I think playing medium tanks is a great way to learn the game, is because you have to learn how to trade effectively, whereas in some of the heavies you get away with some of the things that you probably shouldn't do, and so you'll learn for when you're playing all of the tanks that you're playing to get a little bit better, and of course learn the game, deal more damage, get more kills, carry more games, and win more games as well. So that's kind of where my own personal idea of what I would do if I was starting as a brand new player on World of Tanks would probably come in. And so yeah, the E50 is very good at being able to do that, followed by the E50M. The only downfall of playing the E50 is that your standard rounds are AP, and so you do not have particularly the greatest AP rounds. 230 pen is very lackluster when it comes to playing up against tier 9 and tier 10 heavy tanks, and of course the heavily armored TDs, that sort of thing. So yeah, it feels a little bit like you have to fire a lot of premium in this tank to make it work like effectively if you want to deal a lot of damage consistently, which sucks that is the case in World of Tanks, but unfortunately sometimes it is just what you're gonna have to do, and you have to suck it up if you want to do good. So yeah, it's one of those things I wish it didn't have to happen, but it does. So either way, this is a full premium round loadout in the E50, and yes, yeah, I'm not surprised. The E50 is one of those tanks that most people will just fire full premium, and that's because the APCR rounds, obviously compared to AP, have literally no disadvantage. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I think most people should probably start thinking about when they do play their tanks, as to what is genuinely going to just be the better round. And so what you see with the APCR rounds, however, is that you get 270 pen. So it's still less than the standard pen of the Leopard PTA. So yeah, it's one of those things where you're having to fire more premium but still having less pen than your PTA. So if it comes from a standpoint of trying to conserve your silver, then I would probably recommend the PTA, but for the most part, for the learning curve and how to learn and do better, this tank is definitely the way to go. Now, once again, this replay is brilliant because it's showcasing that, you know, you don't always have these steamroller games where there's one tank that's just able to push forward and deal a load of damage all in one, and instead you've got someone like this where your team have basically lost the town and they've lost kind of the push into their base. There's no one really helping the E50 here at this point, and so he's going to have to try and redeploy so he can have whatever's left of his team to actually support him. And this is one of the big things that he's done in this game. Rather than stay where he was, often he'll be outside of the view range of both of the tanks that are left alive. So what he does is he pulls around here, whereby if anyone YOLOs him, at least they're going to take more damage from his teammates, hopefully, if that is even possible. Now, the Charfuture, obviously thinking he's a big brain player, decides to YOLO down, gets trapped out in the open, and our friends in the Lorraine 40T finishes him off alongside the WZ. And this is exactly what I mean. This is case in point of using your team to deal more damage and keep yourself alive. Whereas if he just stayed over on the right hand side where this M6Y is, then he would have probably got YOLO'd without taking any, with taking a lot more damage, and potentially none of the team would have been able to hit him. So yeah, using the advantage of terrain and your knowledge of the map is where these German mediums are just going to be able to outperform almost everything else. And what's great is now we can start to use the armor of the tank. The turret armor of an E50, it's kind of a bit troll. It is very, very flat, but at the same time, it's also got just very thick armor. So you can bounce a few rounds, especially against tier 8s and tier 9 vehicles. As soon as it comes to tier 10, most people will be able to pen you through the front using their premium rounds. And once again, the enemies are YOLOing down to try and get him out of this hole. But luckily, because of his teammates being able to hit them from over here, they get taken out real quick. And this is literally what you want to be trying to do in your own games. Most people complaining about the team, my team didn't help me, but if he'd have been over on this side, yes, your team are probably not going to move to try and help you out. It's just, unfortunately, not what usually happens in World of Tanks. Usually it's because they don't particularly have a brain and they don't want to get more damage themselves, even if it would be a good play. So if you can make it easy where they don't even have to move and potentially get some damage, then you're probably more likely to come away with getting supported and stuff like that. So this is stuff I would recommend to anyone that is thinking about how they can perform and do better within World of Tanks. And that's kind of what we do these videos for. Hopefully they're interesting, informative, cool to watch, whatever. But of course, if they're not, let me know and I'll try and change up the content to see what you guys actually want. But so far, looking very good in this game, picking up 5.4k damage and 2,000 assistance as well, which is amazing considering everything that's kind of gone on in this game and how badly they were down just 3 or 4 minutes ago. But with all that being said, the enemy WZ is still in his location. He gets set on fire, has a fire extinguisher, unfortunately, so no more damage there, but he can get one more into him. Bounces, should have maybe gone for the upper right hand plate as he was slightly angled, but we won't at this sort of case in point. Yeah, I don't think we'll complain all too much that he managed to miss that one, as it's just one of those clutch situations where you're probably hoping you can deal damage. And there you go, connects one into the inner drive wheel, obviously the inner drive wheel being here but on the WZ, and then another one in there. The WZ resorts to firing HE, which is typical of people that just genuinely don't know how to pen. And if you are wanting to pen the E50, you do have a cupola right here, and of course these flat plates right here, you just basically load premium, and most tier 9 vehicles will be able to go through it, providing that you aren't angling the turret slightly and they're still aiming for the front. So that's kind of where the E50's weaknesses are. When it comes to the armor, obviously lower plate is a key weak point of this tank, and basically any of the side armor, if you give it to the opponents, you'll get penned as well. But with that all being said, what you're seeing now is the friendly team are starting to get spotted, and that's because the AMX on the enemy team has decided to push around. A good play by the AMX, but unfortunately for the enemy team and for the AMX, they're not going to be able to help out for very long because they both get finished off in quick succession, and now it's time to remove the RNG out of the equation by getting rid of the GW Panther, at least hopefully. And the E50, obviously having 390 alpha, is able to deal with this guy quite easily, and especially when you load HE and go for the turret, but unfortunately for him, he actually only manages to splash the GW Panther for 123 damage, which is perfect. Just what you want at this kind of point in the game. But don't worry, because now the T26E5 Patriot, the premium tier 8 American heavy, is about to find out why you don't mess with an E50, and that's because DPM of the E50 is incredibly good, and when you use that with getting slightly hold down where people can't see that big lower plate, yeah, you can bounce quite a few, especially off of the lower tiers, and he's about to be dominated here. Patriot obviously trying to go hold down, but yep, a nice little shell into the side of him, and then ends up winning the game, which is exactly what you want from your medium tanks, and a really strong carry, showing why the E50 is one of the best tier 9 mediums and one of the easiest lines for you to actually grind out if you've never played a medium before. And then rolling into our next tank that we do have, and the final one for today's video, we do have the other German tier 9, and this one is in fact a reward vehicle. It is, of course, the Kunze panzer, and this is one of the more interesting of the lot of them because it gets the siege mode mechanic whereby you can use it to get increased damage per minute. You can get it to have increased gun depression, and that gun depression compared to the Leopard PTA, which is fantastic already, this one has 15 degrees, making it one of the best and most versatile medium tanks when it comes to using it on a ridgeline, because it is just crazy good at finding those weird spots, weird angles to be able to find shots onto your opponents, and hopefully this replay is going to show exactly that. Now then, in the beginning of the game, he decides to push up towards the cap circle, or at least onto this sort of area where he's able to get over here. Now the teammates in the UDES and of course his friend in the 430U have been able to spot what sort of vehicles are going to be over there, and he finds himself up against a 60 TP who looks and appears like he may even be a bot. And I don't mean that in the sense of a player, but genuinely the movement of the turret and the rotation of it genuinely looks like this guy is using a bot to be able to play on his account. So we don't know, obviously it might be a player, you never know with World of Tanks, but yeah, it just seems a bit weird movement, a bit weird place to go at the beginning of the game in a 60 TP. But either way, the Kunze panzer is going to make use of it and hopefully get a bit of damage. He swaps to the actual gun mode, or whatever you want to call it, the actual siege mode, to deal a bit of damage, and then back to the mobility mode. Now when you're in your siege mode, you do have limited kind of accuracy, that sort of stuff, or you have better accuracy when you're in the siege, but when you're in the movement mode, you have increased movement, but you suffer on accuracy and stuff like that. But of course, with the 60 TP now moving up, he's going to be able to use the gun depression here to hopefully plow one into the weak point of the 60 TP. 60 TP now looks like he may be less of a bot. I don't know. You never really know, but I guess it's just free farm at this point. So he gets into the movement, and the swapping between the two modes is what makes this tank very, very good, because if you can master that and you can know when to swap between them, you can maximize how this tank is going to be able to be played. And it is a more difficult vehicle. It's probably not for your bog standard player that's only played a couple thousand games and doesn't really know all of the spots on the map, doesn't really know how to play mediums. It is not particularly the most forgiving, which is why the E50 is one of those. But when the Kunze panzer is played correctly, it can be really, really strong, and that's because it has the perfect ammo loadout, it has APCR, it has heat, and then it gets these HE rounds as well, and these are very, very good, but they don't get the HEP rounds, which is a bit unfortunate considering it's German. It would have made this tank even better from where it is, and by no means is this tank insane. It is definitely not on the level of the PTA. It doesn't get the alpha damage that the PTA has, and in fact has reduced alpha damage compared to the PTA, as with the E50. This has got 390. And the penetration on your kind of APCR rounds on this thing is not too bad either. You've got 268, so it's better than the E50, meaning you don't have to fire premium. But if you do fire premium, you get the heat rounds, and the heat rounds have 300 pen, which isn't a massive upgrade, but it is very nice for those flat armored vehicles, things like German tanks, and I guess they were designed to deal with their own tanks, and unfortunately you're seeing him miss on the E50. I guess unfortunate for the player here, because he's probably going to finish off the enemy or the friendly GW Tiger here, but you know, it is what it is. I don't think we're going to be too angry about the fact that he's going to take out the GW Tiger, but doesn't manage to do it anyway, and the Kunze panzer actually tries to ram the E50. Not a good idea when the Kunze panzer weighs absolutely nothing, and of course deals no damage in return for taking 176. So yeah, I can see why he wanted to do it, to finish off the E50, but it just was never going to happen. Either way, in this game, 3.6k damage done, which is amazing for the fact that this is kind of at the early stages of the game and there's still so much damage left to farm, and once again, it's a losing battle. And this is why I wanted to show all three of these replays, is because although you might have these perfect conditions in some of the games where, you know, your team are winning but they're not winning too hard, where you can carry a flank, the losing games are always more interesting, because this is what the majority of your games are probably going to look like when it comes to World of Tanks. You don't often get those kind of games where your team are good enough to win against the enemy team, but they just don't deal the damage as much, and so you can just basically sit there and farm and the enemy team just get dumped on. But this is where you're going to actually have to try and do it yourself to win the game and try and actually win it. And so in this game you're seeing 4k damage has been done, but there is a lot of vehicles starting to push up from the northeastern side of the map. We have a Type 4 heavy and a 60 TP, both of which kind of annoying to actually deal with when you're playing in a medium tank, because you know you just need the flat penetration, and if you're at long ranges it can be a bit of a pain. But luckily able to hit into the 60 TP, and it seems like it's 60 TP field day today. There's been one at the beginning, we saw one over on the northeastern side, and then of course another 60 TP over here, so there's 3, and yeah, they're not even platooned either, which is weird. So with the 60 TPs rolling around and having the high alpha that they do, you definitely don't want to get hit by any of those, because the Kunze panzer has absolutely no armor, and if you're bouncing around in the Kunze panzer, you've got incredibly lucky. But the Type 4 is now starting to push around, but because the Kunze panzer has those heat rounds, it's actually a big counter to deal with a lot of these vehicles. And the Type 4, obviously very flat armor, perfect for those heat rounds, and easily able to pen through the side of him, especially when he's exposing the side or the kind of angled plates that is the kind of shoulder of the Type 4 and the Type 5 heavies. Now the M103 starting to push around, loads back into the APCR round, or at least loads it up. It doesn't need it though, because he's going to go for the heat into the side of him. Easy as you like, 5.7k damage done, and still a little bit left to go within this game. But Type 4 is here, as you can see, gives the side of his turret, unfortunately goes into a completely wrong place from where he's aiming, which is typical wargaming, thank you. But Type 4, maybe you can get one into him before he can escape, and yes he does, but the Batchat 15558 is sat there doing his business with one hand on his mouse and one hand on his you know what. And so with the 60 TP and the Type 4, who were both left alive on a decent amount of hit points, the enemy team could win it. The Type 4 probably not going to be able to survive to the end, but if the 60 TP plays it correctly, he could maybe win with the artillery support. But luckily the 60 TP is going to try and poke out from the corner. He gets tracked by the artillery and hit by the Kunze. This is like the ultimate position. 60 TP now thinking that he's funny, trying to poke and keep locked on, but luckily the good mobility and the preservation of the hit points from our Kunze panzer here is quite nice. Of course, artillery literally hitting the rock in front of him and still managing to stun him for about 12 seconds, something like that, which is just the stun mechanic on artillery is just something that is horrible in general. I absolutely despise the whole thing about having stun rounds on artillery. It's just more annoying than just being hit, because at least you can be over with it and it's not affecting you at that point. Now, the Super Conqueror in the chat is obviously raging at someone, calling people idiots. Just your typical World of Tanks game, I guess. But with the Kunze panzer now kind of thinking about going for the 60 TP, he has to wait for him to kind of push towards his teammates. He's got a 257, and the 60 TP actually looks like he's trying to turn. But unfortunately for him, he's not going to be able to do a whole lot, and that is not the greatest, because now the 60 TP is a bit triggered that the Kunze is now farming him in the backside, and yeah, uses the UDES 15 or the UDES 16 even to be able to kind of get behind and make it very annoying for the 60 TP to be able to hit him. And what maybe the Kunze didn't realise is that 60 TP actually fired there and actually ended up hitting the rock back here somewhere. So he could have maybe pushed into him, but he's probably thinking about the artillery maybe, and of course rightly so, given that the M53 is still sat there with one hand on his you know. Anyway, with 6.9k damage done and still the 60 TP finishing off his teammate in the Progetto there, it is making it a little bit more difficult to be able to win. And the 60 TP, obviously a very annoying tank to be able to deal with, so he's going to make sure that he's going to find a position where he's on the advantage. And when you're in the Kunze panzer, what sort of advantage can you get? It wouldn't be using the 15 degrees of gun depression that you get, would it? And of course, that's exactly what he's attempting to do here, and get the gun depression into the cap circle where the 60 TP is going to be, and just try and relocate to a better position and surprise the 60 TP as to where he's going to actually be looking. And so with him being down here somewhere, he's going to be able to hit him regardless of where he is in the cap circle right now. And the 60 TP looking the wrong way, absolutely fine by the Kunze here. And so he swaps to the movement mechanic. He wants to make sure to get backwards, and yeah, trying to avoid any artillery shells. Please don't fire, please don't fire. Gets behind the rock, provides a little bit of cover. Is the artillery going to get him? No, they don't, and that's what we love. 60 TP obviously still in the cap circle. Looked like he was making his jolly way along to be able to get into a different spot. Looks like he's exited the cap, which would make me think that he's over here rather than down in the bottom. But you never really know. Maybe he's gone over here and trying to go around. Maybe he's actually moved all the way over here and is trying to come up from behind. And yeah, the 155-58 does actually finish off the friendly artillery, which is perfect. And it appears like the Batchat was actually over coming towards the base as opposed to sitting in their base. So yeah, a bit unfortunate there, but either way, he is now unsure of where this 60 TP has gone. And like I said, he may have come around here, but I'd be doubtful that he would do that. And instead, it's more likely that he's going to be moved over here. Now, by going over this location, he's going to be able to proxy him if he's down there. But it looks like the 60 TP has tried to make the aggressive play. Maybe he's gone down, I don't know, tried to escape somewhere. But it seems like he wouldn't have been able to do that. And so the most likely alternative is that he's tried to take up over here. But with absolutely no team support, oh, he finds himself the 60 TP in the backside, finishes him off for 388, actually rolling what he deserved to roll, and yeah, winning the game with 7.7 thousand damage and 1,000 assist as well, showcasing the 15 degrees of gun depression and the more interesting tier 9 medium tank from the German line. It's definitely not as good as the E50 and the Leopard PTA, but a very, very fun one indeed, and I'd be interested to see your thoughts on all three of these German mediums, and what tanks would you like me to see next in the videos upcoming. Let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.